Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Opposing Points podcast. My guest today is Dr. Miriam Grossman, author of Lost in Transnation, a child psychiatrist's guide out of the madness, out today. She's a board certified in psychiatry and in the subspecialty of child and adolescent psychiatry. She's the author of 4 books, including Unprotected and You're Teaching My Child What? Dr. Grossman's work exposing the origin and hazards of the sexuality and gender industry has been translated into 11 languages. She has lectured at the British House of Lords and the United Nations, and she is featured in Daily Wire's critically acclaimed documentary by Matt Walsh, What is a Woman? I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you do, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, Miriam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for having me.
So your book is absolutely phenomenal. It's one of the I've read Deborah So's book. I've read Abigail Schreier's book, which you mentioned. It seems like we are getting more and more voices speaking out about this, and you've been talking about it for a while, especially this thing targeting youth, this rapid gender onset dysphoria. What do you think is it about these last few years that you feel this is having such a grip on young people and over people in this country?
Right. Well, so what you're speaking about, David, is ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria, which was identified. The term was actually coined in 2018 by researcher and physician Lisa Lippman from Brown University. You see, as I explain in the book, Lost in Transnation, and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I explained that we've always known about this condition in which rare individuals have a terrible feeling of disconnection and incongruence between how they feel in terms of what sex they feel themselves to be and their physical bodies. So we've known about this for like 100 years in psychiatry.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always extraordinarily rare. And the people in whom we were seeing it, those very rare cases, were essentially 2 groups, essentially. It was very young, mostly boys, who, and that would be the Jazz Jennings type of person, who by the age of 2 and 3 years old is coming to their parents and saying, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. Or I have to become a girl because I don't feel like a boy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's called childhood onset gender dysphoria. And those kids have been studied, even though they were so incredibly rare, so rare, David, that 20 years ago, there were only 2 clinics in the entire world to deal, and to help these families. There was one in Toronto and there was one in Holland.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how rare it was. That was the first group. The second group were mostly middle-aged men, not all men, but most of them, middle-aged men that were heterosexual and that enjoyed cross-dressing and eventually would decide to go through so-called transitioning and living as a woman. So those were the 2 groups that we knew about. And I should mention that the younger kids,
Mm-hmm.
we knew from 11 out of 11 studies that a vast majority, between 60 and over 90% of these kids, would grow out of it. So if they were permitted to go through their childhood, go through their adolescence, their normal puberty, that by the middle or the end of that puberty, they generally will have accepted their physical body and be fine with being a boy or a girl. A lot of them are gay or lesbian, but they are content with their bodies. Okay, so that's where we were until about, I don't know, 5, 8 years ago.
Right.
And then the numbers started really going up. But the numbers were going up not in those two populations that I told you. The numbers were going up in a new population. And these were adolescent girls.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a new demographic. And we didn't, no one was really asking what's going on. And people were just assuming that this was a similar gender dysphoria as the other two groups. But you see, you can't do that, as I explain in the book. Gender dysphoria, discomfort with one's physical sex, is a symptom. And symptoms can be caused by many different conditions, different reasons. So, for example, fever. Fever is a symptom. You get a fever from having an infection. You can get a fever from having an autoimmune disorder. You can get a fever from having cancer. You can get a fever for many, many reasons. So gender dysphoria is a symptom. And the problem is that the mainstream medical associations in this country are lumping all the different gender dysphorias together. And they're saying that this is something that's inborn, that doesn't change, and that there's only one approach to helping these people. And that is to facilitate their living a life of the opposite sex, including medical interventions such as puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries. And I and many other people are saying, whoa, 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 wait a minute. What are we doing here? This is a new demographic.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the younger kids, we know that most of them will grow out of it. We know that for most of them, it's a temporary identity. So what's going on right now in our country is dangerous. What's going on is that parents have just so much misinformation that is being really shoved down their throats.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I'll just take one example, the expression sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. And I said this and I testified in Congress last month. It's kind of appalling, right? That a doctor needs to go to Congress and explain that sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception when the sperm meets the egg.
It's cellular.
You know, it's so why are we hearing this phrase 24/7?
Mm-hmm.
Sex assigned at birth. Well, it's an Orwellian phrase. It's designed to impact the way that we think. It's designed to lead children to believe that they were just randomly assigned being a boy and a girl, and that just may be a mistake. And one of the things my book is about is empowering parents to give their children the right information, the accurate scientific information about these things,
Mm-hmm.
which includes telling young children, from the moment that you came to be, from the moment that you were created, 9 months before you were born, you were either a boy or a girl. And that is a permanent condition, and that can't be changed. Now, there are people that feel like they're the opposite sex, but feelings change.
Yes.
So feelings change, but biology chromosomes do not, anatomy, does not change unless you come in there with a scalpel. And well, you've read my book, so you've read the chapters that describe those procedures, right?
Yes, they're very hard to get through. Even no matter how many times I read it, it's just the feeling that you get inside that this is being done is just horrific. But I mean, the whole thing is Orwellian. Gender affirming care. Well, we only affirm them until they go under the knife, and then when they change their mind, there's no affirmation there. They're just kind of left flailing with, well, all these complications that you write about, like the urethra, having problems urinating, no orgasm. All these things are just put to a halt, and they're just left in a worse condition than when they were found.
That's right. And everyone, talks about suicide, and parents are led to believe that if they don't consent with putting their child onto this expressway toward medically transitioning, that their child is going to commit suicide. Now, I want to just make it very clear to the parents out there that there is no epidemic of suicides among transgender identifying kids. They are at some increased risk of suicidal thoughts and suicidal behaviors, and perhaps completed suicides, but so are kids who have other psychiatric disorders that most of these kids are presenting with, such as anxiety, depression, being on the autism spectrum, and the many, many other conditions that their kids are suffering from. Furthermore, we have no evidence that these medical and surgical interventions uh, will decrease the number of those suicides. In fact, I am very concerned that those suicides may increase as these kids realize that their underlying issues were never attended to, and they still have their anxiety and depression and history of trauma and complex PTSD. But in addition to all of that, they now have a laundry list, as you said, of terrible medical problems, chronic infections in their genitals, inability to respond sexually. Their breasts have been removed. I mean, it is there's really no words. There's really no words
I
for
saw
what's done to these young people.
I saw somebody post on Instagram the other day a video of a mom saying, "I'd rather my child change her pronouns 1,000 times than have to write her eulogy or the eulogy." And it's just such a widespread belief among people. And I think you talk about this a bit in the book, is that I think most people genuinely care about the kids and want to help them. I do wonder if we talk about some of these people that are head of WPATH, for example, the activists, whether they actually know that they're hurting people, or if they, in their deluded minds, think that they're helping.
Well, I mean, great question. I think that when it comes to beliefs and ideology, we've seen this over and over again in history. People can just become, single-mindedly devoted to an ideology, and I'm sorry. And after a while, they can become unable to make a U-turn. And I'll explain something very important for you to understand. You see, once doctors and parents and therapists have been on this bandwagon, and they have been encouraging children in this direction, thinking that they were saving them, it's going to be really hard to be able to, honestly look at this and say, oh my God, maybe it's not exactly how I think it is. And that's why some of these parents who have transitioned their children and sterilized them in the process, they can't psychologically bring themselves to a point of facing what they've done. So in order not to face that, of course, they become the most zealous, because they have to be convincing themselves that what they did had to have been the right thing for their kid. Do you understand how this works?
Yeah.
So it's a very dark thing, and it's a dangerous thing, but I'm telling parents that they can immunize their kids. They can, if their kid is already in it, they can be brought out. And I give examples of patients of mine that um, did turn around and realize that they were mistaken, and they do embrace their physical reality, their physical sex, or at least they are slowed down in the process. Because once they start to get all the accurate information, which they're not getting at school, and they're not getting from their gender therapist or their pediatrician, but once they do get the information about what it's really like for a girl to be on testosterone and a boy to be on estrogen for the rest of their lives, well, a lot of these kids will slow down. And that's what we want, because as they slow down, they're maturing, right? Their brains are maturing so that, they're able to reach an age in their 20s, mid 20s, hopefully, when the brain is fully developed. And when it comes to big decisions, hopefully a mature brain is going to be using the thinking part of the brain and not the emotional part of the brain and not the impulsive part of the brain, which is what adolescents do. Duh, we know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Adolescents want what they want now. They want it now.
Yep.
And they don't want to be told that in a few years you may regret this, and in a few years you may want to have kids when you're older.
Yep.
They don't want to hear it. Well, no, I don't want to have kids now. I'll adopt, whatever. It's a non-issue. Now, the outrageous thing, Dave.
30. Like, even later in life, you could change your mind about kids. You don't have to be adolescent.
Oh, absolutely. People in their mid to late 30s, early 40s are changing their mind about having kids.
Yeah.
And then they're in a big rush to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the thing that's one of the such disturbing things to me as a physician is to discover other physicians that realize that there are issues here, but they go ahead and do it anyway. And in the book, for example, I talk about an endocrinologist by the name of Daniel Metzger.
Mm-hmm.
There's a YouTube video of him giving a talk to other doctors, and he's saying, I've always been aware that when you talk to a 14-year-old, they're not really in any space in their head to even talk about being a parent later in life. They're just not ready to even talk about it. And he says something like, I've always felt kind of uncomfortable with that, with putting these kids on blockers and on cross-sex hormones, but we want them to be happy in the moment.
Yeah, that one stuck with me because happy in the moment's like, oh, you want a cool haircut? You want to dye your hair? All things that aren't permanent. That stuck with me for sure.
I mean, for a medical doctor to be talking like that is really concerning. We are the adults in the room. We have to represent reality. We have to represent the long-term reality. We have to be thinking, how's this kid gonna be doing when they're 30 and 40 and 50? We have evidence that these interventions, medical interventions, actually may take years off the lives of people. Okay, they may be dying earlier because they have an increased incidence of all sorts of cardiovascular issues, certain cancers. They have mental health issues. They have higher rates of suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, David, you may not be aware, the book just came out a few days ago,
Mm-hmm.
but it is already being banned.
Yeah, I'm not shocked.
Well, you see, I didn't know this, but what's happening now is that, for example, Barnes and Noble, they don't come out and say, we're not going to carry this book, we're banning it because of the contents. What they do apparently is that they will stock a very, very low number of books.
Yep.
And then they quickly run out. and they tell people we're out of stock and we can't tell you when we're going to have it in stock.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what my followers are telling me. And on Twitter, I'm on Twitter at Miriam_Grossman. And I have lots of people writing in and saying they tried to get it at Barnes and Nobles. They were told it's out of stock. There are also, at this point, 14 bogus books up on Amazon that are pretending to be my book or are pretending to be associated with my book. For example, saying that they are a guide to Lost in Transnation, or they are a workbook to Lost in Transnation. So I want your listeners to know, do not buy those books. My book does not exist in soft cover. It only exists in a hardcover. And please go to my website, miriamgrossmanmd.com. There's a link there that will take you to the real book. I don't want you to waste your money and then open up the package from Amazon and see. One person told me that it had my cover, and she opened it up and it was a book on office organization.
Jeez. One of the things I want to close out with here is again, I really enjoy the conversations that you kind of put throughout the book. There's a lot of nonviolent communication in there, principles that I was reading through. I think they're very helpful. And you also provide about, I think it was like 10 or 8 to 10 recommendations for parents to save their kids from this, like monitoring. One of them happens to be homeschooling, which I feel like for some, they may not be able to do that because what the government through monetary policy has done is made it impossible to have a parent at home with the child. And so they basically have to work to make ends meet, and they give the child to the government, and then they're indoctrinated. And so I feel like a lot of parents in those middle to lower income might be in a poorer position than the wealthy. So what can parents do in that income range to not be so defenseless against this ideology?
Right, right. Well, I have a whole chapter on schools in the book, so that parents can be up to date on exactly what is going on in the schools. Some schools, not all, some schools are indoctrination centers where their kids are going to be hearing, for the 8 hours that they're in school 5 days a week, they're going to be constantly exposed to trans ideology. They're going to be told that the people can be born in the wrong body. Again, no medical basis for that. They might be led to believe by a teacher or a school guidance counselor that if they have anxiety or they're unhappy with their developing bodies or they're depressed or any number of things, that they may be transgender. And I've had many, many families come to me that say that their kids heard about it at school. So parents need to be proactive here. And I have an appendix written by lawyers who are experts on parent rights. Parents have the constitutional right, and the Supreme Court has been very clear on this issue, the right to be in charge of your child's upbringing and schooling. So there's a form that can be downloaded in the book in which parents can go to the school, and this is before there's any kind of issue with your child. This is before you find out by accident that your teenage daughter is actually using the boys' bathroom, which does happen quite a bit, by the way. So it's before all of that happens, and you're going into the school with this form, and you're explaining to the school that you are in charge, and you do not want your child being taught this transgender ideology, and you certainly will not permit any sort of what's called social transitioning, which is changing of the child's name, pronouns, allowing her to use or him to use the facilities of the opposite sex. You certainly will not permit that, and you are putting them on notice that you're going to hold them responsible for legally responsible for any damage that may result. So I'm calling on parents, please don't let yourself become victims. If there's one overarching message of my book, I've been talking all day, so my voice is getting weak.
All good.
If there's one overarching message of my book, it's that parents know best. Parents, trust your gut. Don't necessarily trust the expert with all the diplomas on their wall. And I've got a lot of diplomas on my wall.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of pains me to say this, but some people with diplomas on their wall are going to mislead you onto a path that is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want more victims. I don't want more people contacting me that they need a therapist like myself who will help them out of this. I want to prevent this. I want families to be reading this book when their kids are still little. Because, when the kids are little is when you can tell them, you're a boy and you're going to be a boy forever. And that's a great thing. And you know what? There's many different kinds of boys. There isn't one way to be a boy.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you have to be a football player or, love cars or all that stereotypical garbage. There are boys that have more feminine interests, if you want to call it that. There are boys that like playing with dolls. There are boys that are designers and they're into hair and makeup, and that is fine. You do not need to believe that you need to become the opposite sex, which isn't possible anyway.
Mm-hmm.
The way you are is perfect.
Thank you so much for your time. For the viewers, Lost in Transnation is available now. If you can't get it at Barnes & Noble, you can get through Miriam's website or Amazon, but don't buy the fake ones, as she mentioned. But Miriam, thank you so much for your time. I see your book as a tool and a public service. It's absolutely incredible. It was hard, but I couldn't put it down to read. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, David. And I really want to mention that there's a foreword written by Jordan Peterson. And I am so grateful that Dr. Peterson took the time and the energy to write a phenomenal foreword to the book.
It was phenomenal. That was a phenomenal foreword. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.